Hi, I'm Phil Cooke, and welcome to the Phil Cooke Podcast. Today, we're going to talk about one of my favorite subjects, which is leading through a crisis. We've seen an awful lot of churches and ministry organizations and nonprofits in the last few years really struggle. Some crash and burn, and often a new leader comes in and has to completely reorient everything and right the ship. Well, we're going to talk to Mark Rutland today. He's got an incredible leadership legacy. He's gone into many situations just like this in a crisis and turned the ship around. We're going to have a fascinating conversation, so stay tuned. Well, Mark, I'm thrilled that you're on the podcast. Thanks so much for being here. You have an incredible leadership legacy out there. You've been around a long time. In fact, I think we met when you stepped into the president role at Oral Roberts University in Tulsa many years ago.
That's
and
exactly
helped
right.
right that ship, turn things around. And so I've just followed your career for a long time, and I've always been fascinated with leaders who know how to handle a crisis. And you've certainly had a lot of experience doing that, huh?
Yes, I've been through, of course, life is filled with crisis in the first place.
That's true.
You can say that to
True.
start with. But in terms of institutional crises, I don't know why, but I've been through three of those. I took over a bankrupt megachurch in Orlando, and then Southeastern College, and then Oral Roberts University. So they were all three at some level of absolute crisis.
Yeah. And it may be worth saying, pointing out to listeners that crisis doesn't necessarily mean a moral issue, a sexual issue, or even a financial issue. Sometimes it could be legal. It could be culture changes, people change, and the ministry didn't keep up with it. In fact, honestly, with my media work with different ministries and organizations, that's probably the biggest thing I see is people are just asleep at the wheel when they see culture changing, donors change, and we have to be aware. We have to see that stuff coming.
Yeah, and each crisis. So somebody said one time, there's nothing more dangerous than a leader with a good idea that worked at the last place. And
That's good.
And each place is different. The background of the crisis, the fabric of it. Calvary Church in Orlando had been sort of the trifecta. It had huge sexual challenges, the pastor, all that kind of thing, the whole story.
Right.
And then financial mismanagement, not a scandal in the sense of, stolen money or something. It was just overspent, overbuilt, understaffed. Everything just went wrong. And that one was an absolute nightmare. The bank was ready to foreclose on the note. We were behind 30 days, 90 days behind in our mortgage, and 120 days behind to our vendors when I walked on. I wasn't even paid there for 6 months. And that one was the most total catastrophe that I was in. But to your point, Southeastern College, which became Southeastern University, it went from a failing little college. Now it's the largest Pentecostal university in the United States.
Wow.
And so we had it that 10 years I was there. To your point, there was no scandal. There was no debt. It was all the valves had rusted shut. It was
That's
just
interesting.
Yeah, it was just sitting there rusting, like a piece of rusty machinery out in somebody's front yard. And the issue there was not scandal or even debt. In fact,
Yeah.
It would have been good if they'd had some of the stuff that a debt would have bought. It was just a nightmare. The buildings were decrepit. The dorms were decorated in early concentration camp. It was just awful. So there was no, like you're saying, to approach that as if you're recovering from a scandal would have actually been counterproductive.
Now, when you go into organizations like that, you're both loved by some people and hated by other people, because a lot of people question why this guy's coming in, why they're bringing him in. I remember at ORU, there were people saying, oh, he's going to completely get rid of the charismatic thing, the Pentecostal thing. He's going to completely change this place. And that nothing could have been further from the truth. And yet there are those people out there. How do you manage? It's not just fixing the problem, it's managing kind of the PR and the perception of everything. How do you handle that?
Yeah, and the problem, of course, for example, you gave the perfect example at ORU. I don't know where that came from. I've been a straight out Pentecostal since I left the Methodist Church in 1975 because of the baptism of the Holy Spirit. But there was somehow this folklore. I don't know what it was really, because the chairman of the board was in the Assemblies of God. I had been in the assemblies and left, but I was certainly a long-term charismatic Pentecostal, whatever you want to call that. So the first thing that you have to do is ignore all of the chatter. The chatter that's online, it means nothing. It can't help you. It can't really hurt you. And so the first thing I say to leaders is don't try to fix that. Fix what you're there to fix.
Oh, that's good. That's
There's
good.
there's a great quote from Elizabeth Taylor of all people. She said the best deodorant in the whole world is success. And no matter how people think you stink when you get there, if you straighten out the mess, right the ship, fix the finances, then nobody remembers what they said about you when you got there.
That's true. Now, but at a Christian organization, whether it's a church or a ministry, you also have to make some really hard decisions. Maybe it's firing some people. Maybe it's changing long held, traditions.
Yes.
That's got to be a difficult thing.
Yes, it is difficult, but if you can't do those things, then don't get into turnaround leadership. If if everything that is there, the staff that's there, the people that are there, the philosophy that's prevailing, the institutional nomenclature, if it's all right, then why does it have to be fixed? So
That's good.
you go in with the presupposition that stuff is to some extent or another wrong. And the wrongness, uh, the very first thing, I always tell everybody, the first thing you have to do is a systems analysis. You have to know what's working, what isn't working, what's wrong, and if you fix it, will make a difference. What's wrong, and it is wrong, but if you fix it, it doesn't help. Ignore that.
Yeah. Good.
What's wrong, and you can fix it later. There are all of those things you have to know. For example, when I went to ORU, uh, there were all those challenges, financial, everything else. But my systems analysis showed me that the one system that was really working was academics. For all of it, Oral Roberts had hired a brilliant faculty, and they were working well, and I had a good dean. And so I actually went in and met with the faculty, and I said, look, I'm not going to ignore you. It's
That's
just that
good.
you're not broken. Everything else here is broken.
Wow.
And so I said, the provost is going to be doing his job. I don't have to change faculty. I don't have to do that. I said, what has to happen here is administrative, financial, and enrollment. What I
That's
don't have
good.
to fix is the faculty. So I'm not ignoring you, and I'll come to faculty meetings. But I told the provost, I'm not going to preside at faculty meetings. I want you to do that. I'm going to come in and do a 5-minute rah-rah, tell them how wonderful they are, and tell them a joke and get them to laugh again. There was no laughter at ORU. I just loved on the faculty. I was worried about that, Phil, because the
Mm,
faculty had sued the previous president.
that's true.
So I didn't know coming in if they were just a bunch of litigious, bad people.
Right.
But I had a love affair with the faculty while I was there. I had the same concern with the student body. So I was 61 when I was hired at ORU. I,
Wow.
I had had more than 10 years at Southeastern, and you have all that accumulated good karma. You know,
Yeah.
the seniors love you and they tell the freshmen how brilliant you are and how witty and great and everything else. So you ride that wave. But I was afraid coming to ORU at 61 that they would just say, "Oh God, who's this old guy?" You see what I mean? So
Yes.
those were my two major concerns, and they're the two things that didn't go wrong. I had
Wow.
great rapport with the student body from the opening chapel, and the
Wow.
faculty was great. Challenges were other things, but thank God you can't you can't make it in a situation where everything's broken. Something's got to
Yeah.
work.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting that in many situations I've been involved in, I find there are people that just hate to change. And I
Hmm.
mean, they hate change so much. I'm convinced I've dealt with a few ministries where they had staff people that would rather see the place crash and burn before they change their way of doing things. I didn't have the authority at the time to get rid of that person, but I would have really quickly at the time had I been brought in as the president or something like that. I was just a media consultant and trying to help them shift their media approach. But it's always been fascinating to me, the people that are willing to, you see the declining revenue, the declining response, and people still think we're doing the right thing. I've got to stick with it. I don't understand that.
Yes, you're 100% right. And what exacerbates that situation is when they make it ideological. So,
Oh,
um, and that doesn't happen as badly in secular institutions as it does in religious organizations because they overlay methodology with theology and
okay.
make it into an ideological thing. So, for example, when we built I announced that we were going to start this massive. We spent $65 million at Southeastern, uh,
Wow.
building it, raising it, left it in great shape. It was not in huge debt or anything like that. But I announced all these renovations. The roof of the chapel was leaking so badly that the lights were falling out.
Oh, wow.
And so when I announced we're going to renovate the chapel, we're going to build a new dorm, everything. So we got the first dorm built, and I brought the faculty up before the student body came back for the fall semester. And we stood in front of the new dorm, and I said, "Now look at that. It's beautiful. It's gorgeous. Multi-million dollar dormitory, private baths, everything." I said, "That's where Southeastern University is going." I said,
Wow.
"Now turn and look back at the rest of the campus. Cracked sidewalks with grass growing in it, buildings that would just fallen in." I said, "That's the past. If your mind is there, you
Yeah.
can't go here with me." And I had two long standing faculty members that resigned in an hour, and they were both from the religion department. They said, "Look, you can't have this kind of emphasis on the superficial and cosmetic and preserve the spiritual climate of the campus." And I said, "So you're telling me that shabbiness and holiness are the same thing?"
Good. Good.
And they
Wow.
left. They turned that um, fabric of that tattered little Bible college into an ideological truth. And they could not make the journey. They didn't.
Well, now you lead us to a good point here, and that is you presented that vision. How important is it for a leader during a crisis like this to keep the message out there in front of people, to get the story, that his vision, her vision, where you're going to go in essence? How important is it to constantly tell that story, to keep it in front of people?
Oh, Phil, it's the deal. It's not just like it's one of the top things. It's the thing. When the Bible says without a vision the people perish, that one is
That's good.
that's there. That's not a hint for happy living. You, if you don't have a vision, what it's going to be like, what it's going to look like, what it's going to sound like, not just some kind of vague conceptual vision, but with nuanced specificity. This is what we're going to be. This is how it's going to sound. This is what we're going to shoot for, and you have to overlay it and say it over and over and over again. I always tell leaders, the minute you're feeling bored with your own articulation of the vision, you have to pause and refresh yourself. You have to.
Wow.
You have to.
That's good.
It has to be fresh and new and powerful to you, and you have to say it and say it and say it and keep saying it. Draw pictures of it, have photographs of it, in every way. There is no way to overstate a vision. It is easy to understate it.
Wow, that's a great line. That's a great line. And I think I agree with you 100%. And people love a great story. And if you can articulate it well, they tend to, they're more likely to get on board and really take the risk out there. And sometimes it is a risk. I think one of the things that we don't do in a crisis situation or when we're trying to make things change is make people realize how much better it's going to be on the other side. They don't trust, I think, maybe that we can really do this. And so they often they're just not sure this is going to work out. And then they hold back. And so I think, I don't know, that experience helps, I guess, but getting that story out there is critical.
Yeah, you got to balance two. Here are the two realities of turnaround leadership. On the one hand, you have to tell the truth. If there is no challenge, if there's no crisis, if there's no difficulty, no hardship ahead, then it's not a real adventure. It's the jungle ride at Disney World with pop-up paper mache hippopotamus, but it isn't real. So the purpose, I said a minute ago, of having a systems analysis, the purpose of the systems analysis is institutional reality. And you've got to be able to articulate that. Look, this is where we are. We are bankrupt. We are facing legal challenges. You have to be able to say that. But you have to quickly go the other way and say, however, God didn't send me here for this thing to go under. God hasn't forgotten us. Here's where we're headed. This is where we are. But look, this is where we're headed. So you have to state the reality, or there are going to be people in the organization that know the reality. And if you don't state it, they think either you don't know it or you're lying. So
that's true.
So you have to state the reality, but then quickly follow with positive, faith-filled vision. This is where we're headed.
That's brilliant. That's absolutely brilliant. And part of this, I think, I always wonder how organizations get into this rut to begin with. At what point do they think something's going wrong here and we better pay attention? And yet it seems like organizations churches and ministries too, can get right to the brink of total disaster. And it was like nobody was paying attention to this. That's baffling to me. What would you say to leaders who are leading organizations now? What should they be paying attention to before they get to the brink of disaster?
Well, what a great question. Everybody wants to talk about the turnaround. They don't want to talk about what happened. Something happened to get to the place where you need a turnaround. Yes. And one of the things is, let me give you just two things because they're inseparable. Okay. One is they ignore reality. What I said a minute ago about institutional reality. Yes. That institutional reality has been creeping up on that organization for a long time. Yeah. When a hurricane hits Miami, it didn't start that day. It was a low pressure area off the coast of West Africa 6 weeks ago. Yes. Pay attention then. Facts are your friends. Watch the attendance, watch the finances, watch for I don't want people to live in some kind of morbid fear, but you got to keep how's the pulse? How's the blood pressure? Is it working? So the second thing then is connected to that, and that is knowing that facts are your friends, knowing that institutional reality is not a threat. It's to alert you. Then don't dismiss it with, okay, I teach a lot of secular organizations as well as religious. So with them, I use magical thinking. When I talk to, it's just something's going to happen. Somebody's going to wave the magic wand and money will pop out of the hat, something. Our
Yes.
sales will reverse. We're just suddenly going to sell lots more. I always ask, why? What catalytic agent is going to change this? When
Good.
in religious organizations, it's worse because they overlay it with faith. So
Yes.
they,
Yeah.
the Greek theater was um, basically the same plot. You have a hero, things get bad, they get worse, then they get impossible, and there's no hope. And then a crane comes over, and the god Zeus comes and rescues the hero. So
Yes.
Deus ex machina, the God in a box, or
Yes.
God in a machine. Okay, so the problem can be with Christians. Yes, we live by faith. Yes, we walk by faith. But if we think that means presumption, no matter what idiot thing I do, God is obligated to pop out of the box and bail me out.
Yes.
So what I say is keep track of reality, change it earlier, do what it takes, and yes, we walk by faith, but don't think that God is obligated to to cover your rear end. That's not.
That's the way to put it. All right, let me give you another little challenge. One of the things I've run into a lot over the years is, God values everyone equally. We are
Hmm.
all equal in the sight of God. However, not everybody brings the same gifts and talents and productivity to your organization. So we have to make some hard decisions about who's helping us and who's hurting us. And, Christians want to be nice to everybody. We want to help people. And I've had so many pastors tell me, well, I know Floyd's not doing well, but nobody else on the team knows. And he's been with us for 30 years and he's a good guy. So I just want to keep him on. And I'll respond with, trust me, everybody knows Floyd's not doing the job. Everybody knows he's a huge bottleneck and it's creating frustration and resentment on the team. And we just have to make some real hard choices. Now, it doesn't mean we cut Floyd to the curb. We kick him to the curb. Let's help him get plugged into an organization or a ministry or a company where his gifts can be used. But we've got to get him out of what's, the problem here. So, how do you deal with that with people? Because I know you've probably been really hated for pulling the plug on a few people and sending them on their way. But you've got to make hard decisions like that, right?
Oh, yes. The hard decisions, and they're not always even all staff. Sometimes it's resource allocation.
Oh,
We've been spending money on this, but this isn't taking us where we want to go. This is where
yeah.
we want to spend money. So I'm cutting the budget here, and I'm going to move it over there. So
Mm,
once you make your mind up in senior executive leadership, somebody's going to be mad at you all the time. You just have to be settled with that. Then
good.
once you have that in your mind, you try to make the best decision you know how as God leads,
Yep.
but you have to know that that's not nothing's going to please everybody.
Right.
And that's not now trying to do that is how you sink an institution.
That's true.
So you
That's
have to
true.
make the hard decisions. The second
Wow.
thing is I always tell executive leaders, all this talk about culturally transforming an organization from the bottom up is baloney. Uh, Every organization rises or falls on senior leadership.
That's good.
So get the right people around you at the top. That's your number one priority. You have to try to hire people that are actually better than what that organization ought to be able to have.
Wow.
Try to get superstars, people that are smarter than you are, better than you are. Uh, the president's cabinet is the deal. The
Yeah.
pastor's executive staff. Now you work your way down, and hard decisions have to get made. But the hardest decision and the most important decision is the people at the table with you at the senior executive table. That's where the organization.
But now, wait a minute, Mark. If I surround myself with people smarter than me, that's going to make me look bad. I want to get people that are dumber than me, so I look like the hero here. You ever run into that?
Well, I've heard people say that, but So what you want to do is hire people that are smarter than you are and take the credit.
There you go. All right. I like that. Now, okay. So this opens the door to culture.
Yeah.
Why is culture so important in an organization?
Yeah. Culture culture is what happens in the space between us.
Hmm.
And it's that ambience, that atmosphere. You have a person here and a person here. What happens in here is what we call culture. And therefore, if you get the right people who are thinking the same way you're thinking, the culture creates itself almost. Now, the culture let's take, for example, the culture at Southeastern, because that was a huge culture shift. It was called Southeastern College, and it had hemorrhaged. The enrollment was down. It was
Yeah.
finished. The auditing firm had just sent to the board of directors before I got there that it's time for you to design an exit strategy. That
Wow.
that means, to whom do you sell a shabby little college on the edge of a swamp? That's what that means.
Not a big market for that, I have to say.
Not a big market for that. And so now what happens is the college, the staff, the faculty, and even the student body and the extended constituencies now begin to think of itself that way. That's who we are. So what I faced and what we faced at Southeastern was changing its self-perception. If you
Okay.
if you take over a football team that's gone 2-13 for the last 5 years, the first thing you have to convince them is that they're not losers. That's the
That's
number one
good.
thing. You're not losers. You've just been losing some games, but you're not losers. And I'm going to make you winners. That's
Good.
that's the coach's job on taking over a losing team. So we began immediately to start using the word university. It was not a university for about 4 years, but we just quit saying college. We started saying university. And every time anybody called me on it, in a faculty meeting or anything like that, I would just say, "Oh, sorry. Yes, Southeastern College." But I kept saying it accidentally. Meanwhile, without anybody knowing it except the board, we had gone to Tallahassee and bought the name. So we owned
Good.
the name and uh, the internet.
Domain name.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there you go.
Website.
The domain for Southeastern University. We had it all
Great.
before we ever became. So then we tried to convince we can do this. We can do better. We can teach better. We can have better buildings. You begin to create this sense of momentum. And I knew when the culture had shifted, when been there about 4 years, maybe a little less, 3.5 years. And the head of the humanities department stood up in a faculty meeting and he said, I've got something I need to say. And I thought, oh boy, here we go. And he said, I've been here 20 years. And he said, this is the first time that I feel like a faculty member at a college and not the counselor at a Pentecostal day camp.
Wow. That's
And
heavy.
I knew it had turned. And I said to
Yeah.
myself, it's turned. And from there on, the acceleration of the culture was huge.
Wow. 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 That's fantastic. Now, let me, as we land this plane here, let me ask you this. If you're a turnaround leader, when you go into a crisis situation, do you tell them I'm just here for a short time, or does the public think you're there for forever? How do you handle that?
Okay, that's a good point. So there is a difference between what you might say to the board and what you say is the public perception.
Yeah.
But look, Phil, we're spirit filled. I mean, you and I both. That's so the
Yeah.
bottom line is I'm here forever unless God moves me on. That's the caveat you have to place on every call.
Yeah.
But but I felt at Southeastern I really was there for the rest of my career.
Hmm.
When the situation arose at ORU, that was the toughest decision I've ever made in my whole life. Um, because Southeastern was just purring. You know,
Yeah.
I was like Rush Limbaugh. I could run it with half my brain tied behind my back. And now to step into a third crisis at 61, that was the other thing. You crack your plane up at 41, you got time to rebuild. At
Yeah.
61, if ORU goes under and I'm 61, I'm finished.
Yeah.
So I did tell the board at ORU, I'm here 4 to 6 years. I said that you can't hire a legacy president at 61. So it was 4 years and not 6, but there it was clear. But I didn't make a big point of that with everybody else.
Yeah.
The other two organizations, I intended to be there, to stay there. It was, you hate to be corny about it, but the call of God, if God,
Yeah.
it makes it as clear to you as you can, given your limited ability to hear from him.
True. That's good. That's good for me to know. I've always wondered about that because if you go in with that intention, even though mentally you may go in, I don't think it helps to make people think, "Hey, I'm just here for a year,
No.
2 years, 3 years, and then I'm out." That doesn't build confidence, I don't think.
The
So,
only exception to that might be when I hear you, I do think of this. Say a church, for example, not a college, but a church
yes,
that's had a long-term legacy pastor. You might have a 1 or 2 year buffer pastor who comes in to deal with all that emotional thing. And if they say, I'm here, I'm the buffer, I'm here for 2 years and I'm going, then that might be the notable exception might be that.
that's good. In fact, I've worked with those guys. That's a good point. Great point. And some guys, I think they're particularly older pastors who are experienced now do that for a living. They just go into challenging situations and fix it. All right, now if you were going to say one last thing about leading in a crisis, what do you think it would be?
Watch the movie. Don't obsess over photographs. You take
Say that again. That's real. Say that again. That's heavy. That's good.
Okay, you take a snapshot this day, right now. I've just fired the head of the language department
Okay.
and everybody's mad and everything. That's a snapshot. If you obsess over that, you'll make yourself crazy. Watch the movie. It's all getting better. It's all building. The best is yet to come. The denouement is ahead of you. The wonderful things are happening. And the same thing is true the other way. So I tell pastors all the time, you pastor a church of 100 people and you have 10 visitors, you extrapolate that out. You think, OMG, I gotta build a new auditorium. We're growing by 10% every Sunday. But that's a snapshot that's unrealistic. Look at trends. I'm a big believer in graphs and I'm a big believer in trends. Not a trend over 3 weeks. That's a snapshot. What's the trend over a year, 2 years? Pay attention. Is it up? Is it down? What's working? What's not working? Watch the movie. Don't obsess over snapshots.
That's awesome. Brilliant, brilliant, brilliant. Now, how do our viewers and listeners find out more about Mark Rutland? Where do they go? What do they do?
Wonderful. Well, they can just go to the internet and ask Rabbi Google, who is Mark Rutland, and they'll find Dr. Mark Rutland. By the way, there are other people named Mark Rutland. There is a professor in Australia whose tagline on his website says, "I'm not the American preacher." So Dr. Mark
Okay.
Rutland. You can also go to Global Servants. That's the ministry my wife and I started in 1977. We have girls' homes on 2 continents, churches in West Africa. Our son is now the international president, as well as a pastor of a great church. And then you
Impressive.
can go to drmarkrutland.com. You can get books and material there you want. Got a brand new book out, a good one, selling
Tell
like
me
crazy.
about the book. Tell me about the book.
I'm so glad you asked. Uh, Here is the book. It's called Keep On Keeping On, How to Die Young as Old as Possible.
That's good.
It's a book about aging gracefully and joyfully.
Yeah.
I'm 78 now, and I just made my mind up. I'm not going to be that curmudgeonly old guy that spends my senior years chasing kids out of my yard. Get away
Amen.
from my
Great.
apple trees. I'm just not going
That's
to
awesome.
be that guy. And then I thought, I don't want anybody to be that person. So
Yeah.
this book is a laugh a minute. It's just funny, and It's great. Christmas is coming. Everybody should buy Keep On Keeping On for everybody they know. So people say, is there a minimum age that you can read it? I say buy it for a young person, scare the liver out of them.
That's a good idea.
But
That's a good idea.
But in general, I would say if you don't know what a hula hoop is, you're probably not going to understand this book.
That's a good cutoff. That's a good cutoff. Well, listen, Mark, thank you so much. This has been fantastic. This is going to bless a lot of people, and I'm just grateful for your time. And I've admired your work for a long time, and I appreciate you coming on. And this is going to be great. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Phil. It's a joy to be with you.
Well, I'm thrilled that Mark could be here. You know, crisis communication is so important. And that's why I wrote the book, Church on Trial, How to Protect Your Congregation, Mission, and Reputation During a Crisis. Everything in that book is what leaders need to know to really guide an organization through a difficult time. It may not be a moral failure, sexual abuse, or even financial mismanagement. It could be a number of things, a legal issue, a local issue with the city government. It could be any number of things, but the crisis is what makes it different from every other thing you could possibly think of doing. I mean, the crisis completely changes the circumstances, and being able to lead through a crisis is so important. I'd urge you, if you haven't read it yet, get a copy of my book, Church on Trial. It will really give you a skill set to help navigate a crisis when it comes to your church, your ministry, your nonprofit, even your business. It can make a dramatic difference for you, and I'd encourage you to get it. In the meantime, visit me at philcooke.com. Check my blog out. And by the way, subscribe to my newsletter. It's on the blog, upper right-hand side. You can just put your name and your email address in. We'll send it to you free. Once a week, it's a compilation of my top 5 blog posts. And it saves you from having to come to the blog. We'll email it to you, but it's really great information for creative leaders and creative people. So I'd encourage you to check it out, and I'll see you next episode.